Using contractors. I got caught up. I saw that.
Hello, everyone. Hi. My name is Davesh Soneji. I am chair of the Department of South Asia Studies, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you to this long-awaited launch of Dr. Soneji Yengde's new book, Caste A Global Story, at Penn. I'd like to thank the Departments of History and Africana Studies and the Annenberg School Center for Advanced Research in Global Communication for co-sponsoring today's event. I'd also like to thank my very distinguished colleagues, Professor Tukufu Zuberi and Professor Troutt Powell, whom I'll introduce shortly, for engaging with us today. I'd also like to point out that copies of the book, Caste A Global Story, are available for sale just at the back there. Just scan the QR code, pay, and pick up your copy. Before I introduce Dr. Soneji Yengde, I'd like to say that unfortunately, Provost John Jackson won't be able to join us today due to an unexpected scheduling conflict. But he sent a brief one-liner that I'd like to read on his behalf. He writes, "I wanted everyone to know that I learned a great deal from Soneji's excellent and important new book. I was particularly impressed by the methodological rigor, theoretical nuance, and historical insight he has brought to bear on this important issue." It's now my great pleasure to formally introduce Penn's community to Dr. Soneji Yengde, who joined Penn as visiting assistant professor in the Departments of History and Africana Studies this spring. I wanted to say how incredibly happy we are at Penn to welcome Dr. Yengde to our community. I've had the great privilege of knowing Dr. Yengde for several years now and have been witness to how he has ushered in a new kind of public visibility and consciousness around caste that has come to be stewarded largely by a new, brilliant generation of Dalit intellectuals. It is undeniable that Dr. Yengde and his pathfinding research has been at the center of a distinctly global intellectual engagement with caste, and he has inspired a sea of young Dalit scholars to take the critical study of caste and culture into their own hands. We're very fortunate that Dr. Yengde is now part of our community here at Penn, and as we will see today, his work bridges us between and across disciplines and methods in the humanities and beyond. Welcome once again to Dr. Yengde. I'm now going to switch over into reading Dr. Yengde's formal bio to familiarize you with some of his long list of scholarly and political accomplishments and interventions. Born into a poverty-stricken slum in India, Dr. Soneji Yengde has risen to become one of the most celebrated young Dalit intellectuals globally, a bridge between elite institutions and the world's most marginalized communities. He is one of the world's leading authorities on social inequality and justice. He holds 2 doctoral degrees, the first from the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, where he studied African social theory and migration, and another from the University of Oxford in intellectual history that examined the genealogy and praxis of caste and race. He is a trained lawyer with 2 degrees in law from India and a master's degree in international human rights law from the UK. He has studied on 4 continents and has held fellowships at Harvard University and the Harvard Kennedy School. He has authored nearly 200 publications, including 3 influential books. He comes to Penn to launch an exciting new Ford Foundation-funded project titled the Global Caste Lab to study the deep systems that animate and uphold forms of social hierarchy around the world. Soneji's first book, Caste Matters, catalyzed anti-caste movements across India, Nepal, the US, and the UK. The book was selected as the best nonfiction book of the decade by the Hindu newspaper in India. It was translated into 4 languages, with 3 more translation works currently in progress. Today, we're here to discuss his new book, published just a few months ago. Caste, A Global Story was simultaneously published by Oxford University Press in the US, Hearst in the UK and Europe, and Allen Lane in India. The book is an ethnographic study spanning 15 countries, was named History Today's Book of the Year, and is currently being translated into Chinese, Marathi, Tamil, Malayalam, and Hindi. Soneji's next book project with legal theorist Kevin Brown is tentatively titled Caste Comparison, Liberation Movements in India and the United States, and is forthcoming from Cambridge University Press in 2027. He's also working on a video archive and documentary project on Dalits in the diaspora. I'd now like to take just a couple of minutes to introduce our 2 distinguished interlocutors for today, Professors Tukufu Zuberi and Troutt Powell. Tukufu Zuberi is the Lasri Family Professor of Race Relations and Professor of Sociology and Africana Studies here at Penn. He's also the founder of the TZ Production Company and the writer, producer, and director of the award-winning documentary film and book, African Independence. He's the author of 4 scholarly books and has written more than 70 scholarly articles and co-edited or edited 8 volumes. At Penn, he's also served as the chair of the graduate group in demography, the director of the African Studies program, and the director of the Afro-American Studies program. In 2002, he became the founding director of the Center for Africana Studies and has also served as the faculty associate director of the center. Troutt Powell is an acclaimed scholar of the modern Middle East and the history of slavery in the Nile Valley and the Ottoman Empire. She's Christopher H. Brown Distinguished Professor of History and Distinguished Professor of Africana Studies at Penn. She's the author of several celebrated monographs, including A Different Shade of Colonialism, Egypt, Great Britain, and the Mastery of the Sudan, 2003, and Tell This in My Memory, Stories of Enslavement in Egypt, Sudan, and the Late Ottoman Empire, 2012. She's also the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship and has served as the president of the Middle East Studies Association and was also Associate Dean of Graduate Studies in the School of Arts and Sciences at Penn. Incidentally, I think of Eve as my first friend colleague at Penn, who very warmly welcomed me when I came here from Canada about 9 years ago. And truly, you were the first person at Penn that I actually met and said hello to. So I'm very deeply grateful for that friendship. So I'd now like to finally invite Suraj to talk to us a little bit about the book, after which we will hear from Professor Zuberi and Professor Troutt Powell, and then we will open up our floor for conversation and discussion. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so very much, Davesh. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and those who are still coming. I appreciate you all for being here. This is very exciting. I'm going to start with formal thank yous, and thank yous are not just meant to be formality. They're also meant to be sincere appreciation on my behalf. To begin with Provost Jackson, he was the first person whom we had reached out when I was planning on coming to Penn, and he saw through the potential of the project, what I was going to do, and I'm here. Thank you. Also to Davesh, who then chaperoned at his level, encouraged me throughout to think about Penn as a potential venue to work here. And I had no idea about Penn because I was down in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which apparently some people think is a better place, which But truly thankful to Davesh for his camaraderie, friendship, and a shoulder that I can lean on whenever I have any issues to deal with. Grateful. Thank you to Professor Tukufu Zuberi. It just so happened when the news of me coming here was out, there was one professor who reached out to me and said, let's meet for lunch, organize a lunch. And I was read the email. I was like, this is Tukufu Zuberi writing to me to say, to meet for lunch. I said, what a testament of humility and also a camaraderie, a comradeship that Tukufu offered. Eve welcomed me with her smile, a signature smile that she carries at the history department and also in Africana Studies. I want to acknowledge Joe Park, Dean Joe Park, who's here, who's also been very supportive, very engaging and encouraging, more importantly. Aswin Punath Ambekar is not here. Maybe he will join, but he's returned from India. Thank you also for kind of facilitating this. My students are here. Gabby, Emma is there, Daniel, Avery, Ketan. Where is Nick and Ian? Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It's such a joy. I forced them to come here. So, so I don't think they'll have complaints. Also, special thanks to Lisa and Kitki and the Department of South Asian Studies, colleagues also in Africana and History and CARGC, and Edwin and friends and comrades working behind this. Also staff Angela, Courtney, and everybody involved. Thank you. Now I should begin. The scholarship that comes out of India and is about India is often located in the discursive topics of all things social and cultural. The political aspect of the social and cultural agency, in this case of the outcast, is downcasted. This particular phenomena is not adequately examined. The reasons are apparent. A, lack of internal accessibility and experience with the states as a vulnerable character, fending off the tensions happening within the community, family, and society. One has to go through the fires of these scars to ennoble the theoretical understanding of an intimate topic that is so publicly visible but rarely seen. The seeing is codified in terms of caste that I have to filter through the vertical ranks of hierarchies. You have to go downwards into the descending order, and with each group's gaze, you develop newer political understanding. By the time you arrive at the lowest of the levels, you are exhausted with the rationalizing gaze of the higher castes. But that is how the subject of the outcast is being remade into the realms of caste society the world over. Oftentimes, the scholarship on caste has been observed through the predetermined actors of abstract citizenships made by political elites. If not the top, the subject is the bottom. We seek to understand caste through the lens of Dalit. We seek to understand race through the lens of the experience of black subordinated group in America. It is the lens of the researcher's tiredness, the fatigue, the exertion on the body and the mind caused by repeatedly going downwards into the mines of social disparities to uncover pearls of knowledges. The spatial relationship of the researcher with their subject and the area of study conjures a magical realization. It is then the upasana, the work, the meditative discipline that brings about a reformed and unrefined understanding of the field. More often than not, the privileged sites of examining the world cultures have been Mumbai, New York, or Los Angeles. The otherworldly measures of people are othered in the consideration of world politics. Even the Dalit writers who write have an advantage of sight, pedigree, and sometimes favored categories of representation. Big cities like Bombay, Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, Delhi are all the sites that provide a vantage point for the world to think about the culture and about the vantage and about the people of those culture. Nanded, what is even that? How is it pronounced? And whereabout do you live again? Are the affirmations directed at me as I navigate the tool booths of academic highways by paying the ransom of anonymity and giving away to the privileged sites? I developed a habit of hiding the name of my birthplace because it carried derision and unattractiveness. The locality of my presence started with secondary recognition of my being, of my Dalit being. The factoid of having to live alongside other marginalized group, but superior caste in Hindu India, we were still the untouchables. We could not be equal to the other, even suffering masses. The scholars who have been writing about movements have had a classical anthropological viewpoint of caste. The study of untouchable communities has been an interest in classics, music, art, and sometimes theory. The Dalit vantage point, if it gets recognized, is rarely from the actualized struggles and politicals on the streets, i.e., that is where I start my thinking. On the streets is not a metaphor, but a reality of surviving in the ghettos that are marked by disease, police supervision, and tight control of the aura of rebelliousness carried in our tender minds. Dalit is the radiant sutra of life that has been observed but rarely intermixed. When I started off as a young, enthusiastic, and morally upright Dalit man from the Dalit slum, the sewage canal that flowed 6 feet from where I ate my breakfast, lunch, and dinner reminded me that I was destined to break out of the system, but on the condition of higher morals set by the caste towers. I joined gangs and asserted my agency by taking to the streets for justice and equality. The community shielded me from the state assaults. I did not have the opportunity to engage with leading scientists, scholars, writers, activists who were often based in desirable cities, which meant a 12-hour long journey squatting in, or in my case, sleeping under the benches of general compartments, i.e. third-class compartments. One memory that refuses to leave me is when I missed my overnight train connection to Nanded from Bombay. That night I slept on the floor on a neatly arranged mattress made up of single pages of newspapers. I had my favorite, The Hindu, because in 3 rupees, you got nearly 30 pages. The visuals of police beating the potential thief who was malnourished and hungry as his face showed. But he was beaten by a cop, and witnessing that sent me a signal to not breathe heavy, should that arouse a suspicion in him. It is not difficult. It is difficult not to internalize such outward actions because you knew you were always the next to be insulted or caught in between others' aspersions. I had to seek knowledge out there that I learned was best to mimic, but you cannot belong to it. Even my father's associates of Bombay did not think of him as equal, let alone see his son having page-long reportage in national dailies with a celebrity status. They were all surprised but also humbled to learn, one of whom was the founder of Dalit Panther, Raja Dali, the fiery, poetic, literary maverick, the Buddhist. He quipped that Milan's son, i.e. my father's son, has gone higher in admiration. He's one of the founders of the Dalit Panthers. That is why my approach to the globality of caste of Dalit cosmopolitanism begins with Nanded, the site that I hid or did not bother to share due to the shame I carried. It is also a profoundly engaging site to think about world politics. One of the axioms. Global studies are not only metropolises with their financial ghettos, but also they are regular, dim, poverty-stricken areas where development-led ideas do not empower, but assertion does. The Dalit theory in contemporary times is trying to evolve into the middle class, developing a sensibility of separated, confused consciousness. They are privileged by the arbitrariness of power and attention attached to the decried, befuddled attitude. That is why I make a case for locations alongside hierarchies that often do not get registered due to their paucity of resources of translation, transportation, and transactions to create a meaningful transformation. The Dalit subject has to exist in obfuscation or confusion. The former is better for assimilation. The later is okayed for the monkeyed discrepancy that it offers to the system. The study of the caste system and in turn Dalit life is bereft of the experiential autonomous Dalit agency. There are 300 million of us, yet there is no Dalit academic insight at prestigious universities, this included. The explainable actions could be understood within the chambers of South Asian Studies departments or broader liberal arts and humanities, where heretofore the context was always exteriorized, like Brahminical Orientalism. Caste was and is central to our cognition of making sense of ourselves. We are born into it, and we carry it. The person with caste privilege can talk of inequality and hierarchy in the society, but not in the tone of accepted cultural position. It's an honor or shame, but it remains there. That is why a person born of dominant womb thinks of it personally, even though they may espouse progressive political positions, such as the attacks on Muslims, invite so much attention that they create a currency of Muslim violence in South Asia. But for the Dalit, the person thinks of him or herself within the coded social algorithms of caste. There is a torturous fascination with caste reality that it sticks by. Even though you may despise the acts of molestation committed by the priestly castes in the temple arena, you stick by the non-caste narrative because that involves your kin and in turn you. That is why the person with caste ranks does not risk committing cultural suicide to be reborn in the life world as complete human. There are a few, and they are amongst us, and with whom I'm proud to associate. Call them my friends and family. Otherwise, it is a frightening theater of the macabre. The Dalit, if he or she has to exist, has to carry out the program of approbation or risk the taunts and insults practiced like normative habit among caste-carrying humans. While we have plenty of armchair pundits who gather definitive authority on thinking, many stick to stitching the loose ends of politics, and the professional wordsmiths bespeak the attitude of the dormant thinker. While I was out on the field becoming the subject as well as sample of my own study, it took 15 years for me to realize that my scholarship can conduct its own politics based off my practical and theoretical underpinnings. That is how I write and structure the scholarship, suturing truth with experience and attitude with action. As happens in this text, as we will see, Nanded becomes a site. This is when in 2001 Durban conference happened against racism. That was my dad right here. Him and his associates had organized a dharna as a protest where Indian government refused to acknowledge caste as one form of discrimination. And this was way back in Nanded. 12 hours you have to reach, small town. And you can see this bunch of people sitting and kind of think about politics in 2001. That's how the kind of nature of relations worked. His Panther J.V. Pawar, one of the co-founders of Dalit Panthers. Panther J.V. Pawar had a very interesting insight where we had kind of organized this Dalit Black Panthers meeting when Dalit Panthers celebrated 50 years of their existence. We put together this conference in the home city of Nanded to really bring about lots of celebrated thinking, but also critically analyze. So the Golden Jubilee, and something I ended up doing a special issue with a magazine, a weekly in India called Outlook, on Dalit Panthers. And we did it around the framework of India's independence, where Raja Dhale, one of the founders, had written an article on Independence Day calling it Black Independence Day. And he said the Independence Day didn't really carry the value it had to carry. And on the question of national flag, the national flag was considered an honor. And he said, this is like a rag. If this piece of cloth can't protect the dignity of a Dalit woman, it's just better to shove it in the ass. And obviously that creates a rumor. Lots of furor around that. This is where J.V. Pawar, writing, and he had this long cherished dream of hang out with the founders of Black Panther movement here. And we, in fact, established connections with Bobby Seale and so forth. It was during COVID times. But he really had this desire for his letter to be delivered to Kathleen Cleaver, and he kind of wrote that. I mean, I wrote that, but he told me to write that. That's This is where the meeting took place in Nanded. That's him, Panther, inaugurating the book. When I had my first book, I had him come along with my family members, because I thought that was their way of acknowledging the yesteryears of generation, the kind of Panther spirit kind of continues. Many people don't know that Dalit Panther is usually assumed as a Marathi or Maharashtra-based organization, but it had outfits in nearly 8 other states. One of this was, there were few. This is Uttar Pradesh, but also Gujarati Dalit Panthers existed, and you can see the iconography kind of works out around the kind of expression of this. We come to this book, where this book actually engaged with this kind of conversation about caste existing, goes to Trinidad, looking at indenture era kind of migration, which we'll come to shortly. This is something that we noticed, that one of the first, or rather the first university-led Ambedkar, which we have tomorrow, Ambedkar's birthday celebration at Penn, which took many years. But this was organized in Harvard University in DC, where the Black Students' Council kind of got together and celebrated this. So this kind of legacy goes back to the times. They already started organizing in the 80s, but 90s was the when. And the event has itself a much more animating, because the government refused to give visas, or Indian government refused to give passports to many of the Dalit activists who couldn't come. And so there's lots of letter, and it's in this archive that we're developing. There's an interesting letter where an activist called Mr. Lakshmi Berwa, a retired airman, oncologist, he writes to India's Prime Minister, seeking an audience to really convey to her that there are atrocities committed upon Dalits. And this is what she replies. I have your letter. My program is already full. Ours is like one government that has gone all out to help the weaker and poorest sections. There are many special facilities and programs to help scheduled caste. It's basically what an AI will tell you if you type something of this nature. And this is what he did. Lakshmi Prabha goes to protest against Indira Gandhi with his son. Washington Times carries this like a headlines, and Lakshmi Prabha very kindly says, I must congratulate the photographer, which is here. He writes a letter here. And what he says is that I was demonstrating because Indira Gandhi turned down our request to meet her and express our concern for the atrocities suffered by the Indian untouchables. The editor who put the child's photograph in parallel with Mrs. Gandhi is a very gusty man. You have treated the commoners and head of state as equals. Your newspaper has broken all rules of conventional wisdom or journalism. It is rare to see a commoner and a head of state treated equally in the press. There's lots of activity that happens across the board in America. Down the line, it's very interesting how we see when the event, this is way back in 82, then Dalit becomes the president of India, with kind of a nominal head. And then he's sending a message of congratulations to people, especially at the Harvard University event that I just showed. Politics of Congress continued, but him being a Dalit K.R. Narayanan from South India kind of took on the politics and sent them a congratulatory notice almost 16 years later. He's here, right here, protesting. And as you can see, the protest is around the same time when the Babri Mosque was demolished. And that's how this kind of issues of anti-caste and anti-Muslim violence kind of went hand in hand for the progressive politics. Something that kind of legacy continued down in Boston as well, where there were several initiatives ever since at least I joined to kind of explore this connections and commonalities. And I think Tukufu and I are going to teach a course down the line on Du Bois and Ambedkar. I had promised him, and hopefully we'll do it very soon to kind of explore this kind of established connections. And this is something I've also kind of, when there was Black Lives movement, we kind of showed up. That photo is me holding it. We kind of created this new kind of iconography around the time to kind of really say that there is a bigger history, long durée that has been in communication. Very quickly on Trinidad. Now, one of the things we don't know about Trinidad and indentured era migration is majority of the indentures were Dalits. If not Dalits, they were Shudras. Nearly 90% of them were from the lower caste. There was no business for a Brahmin or dominant caste to travel because you had resources at your disposal. Why would you take the treacherous journey of 3 to 4 months and go and work in slave-like condition? That immigration path really carried a character of caste. So your caste was already known. And majority of these groups who left India had their caste certificate mentioned. This is 1886. This narrative sort of continues. This is a story of a person who I kind of document. He's from a non-Brahmin caste, Shudra. He's a Pandit, and his struggle to become a Pandit, which is usually associated with a Brahmin caste. And his kind of struggle to have his own temple on his own ancestral property, something that really offers us this kind of case study of what happens to caste without Dalit. Because I was looking for Dalits, if there are any, because 19th century, some part of 20th, early part of 20th century, there were Dalits who were going with their own caste names. But by now, there is no Dalit there. If you ask anybody and take a census, there is no. So the assumption that I had that caste system cannot exist without Dalit was kind of actually failed there, because caste system is there, but there are no Dalits. There may be, but they have changed their names and they have really assimilated into an order where there are caste names such as Maharaj. It doesn't have any etymological caste origin, but really kind of resurfaces to a symbol. So majority of these are Dalits, and that story remains to be told, and that's what something I try to explore in this. He's somebody who is a man who is wearing Trinidad's attire, Trinidadian flag, and he is organizer of the Hindu Right group, very assimilationists in this sense, and looks at Trinidad in the sense of this long passage of Indian history. I convinced Eve to say that the book was having Middle East portion. There was a little bit, and she agreed to it, and then she was disappointed. So, but again, one of the reasons we look at parallel economies that are existing also in the Gulf states is majority of workers. You travel through Doha, you travel to Dubai, you'll see lots of Indian workers. And we rarely at all talk about their caste origins. What are this kind of... And one of the ways was to look at their caste compositions, and they really exist within the camp. Though the Middle Eastern, within the campsites, you can't exercise caste, but the affiliations and groups that happen is irrevocably about caste, and how they kind of parallel their each other's struggle into this is something that I thought was also kind of worth noting in this case. And I think finally, there is more to this kind of narrative that functions around these ideas of how the state, and as well as the politics of the state, really changes when it comes to understanding the question of Dalits. And so as the research continued in about 15 countries, there was just much more visible that a new Ambedkarite politics is shaping. There are organizations named after Dr. Ambedkar in various states where people are proudly espousing their, and being an Ambedkarite is to being vocally anti-caste, which is also to kind of put out there that you may have an identity of a South Asianist, but it's a bigger tent to cover. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I really appreciated this book, Caste A Global Story. in ways that are very important, I think, for the study of difference, the study of what it means to be a human being. As I was reading the book, the magnitude of it was not lost on me. And it really provoked me to think of the work of, and he does a wonderful job of covering a lot of terrain, but it really provoked me to think seriously about the work of Angela Davis, the work of Kimberly Crenshaw, the work of Patrill Hills Collins. And the reason that it made me think about these authors is that they attempted to do something with the idea of race, which was superseding the notion of race. In some ways, their theorizing asks us to go back to what it is to be a human. It asks us to consider the various theoretical orientations that may exist about what it means, but then to consider the actual human in this process, which requires that we, in a big way, go past the various theories that we have. These theories, at any rate, are always very incomplete. And these authors have attempted to ask us to do a little bit more. In reading the book, I was introduced to many scholars in India. I was introduced to many movements in India over a very long period of time. And it is worth coming to terms with these scholars, with these movements, with these transitions around what caste means in India, what caste means outside of India. There has been, in the United States, at the theoretical level, many scholars of race tangentially deal with the idea of caste. And they talk about it. It goes back to Allison Davis using the idea of caste as a way of saying why the theories of the race relation school at the University of Chicago failed to explain the situation of Black Americans. He used the parallel, the kind of relationship with caste, to talk about the unassimilability of the Black population. If you had unassimilability, then the race cycle of the Chicago school falters. It doesn't work. Even by the time we get to Oliver C. Cox, there's no clear, it's kind of like he's clearly taking on we might not agree with what he took and what he concluded, but he took it very serious to talk about caste, to talk about caste and its relationship to class, to talk about class and its relationship to race. Now, how these scholars talked about these things gave us a very firm ground for offering a critique of some of the standard notions of race. And now we have entered a moment where although it's coming back, it is not a very good thing to think of race as a biological reality. People are encouraged not to believe what their eyes are seeing, but to see that as something which has been socially constructed for them to see. And so in general, most of the history of the study of race has been the history of a kind of given thing, and people are talking about the thing as a given. The individuals carry the characteristic of being in the race, and as a consequence of that, they are embodiments of that. And this idea is very difficult to get over. It's logically absurd, of course, but it's very difficult to get past the idea. It's logically absurd because people in these different races can go and have sex and produce children. So the races themselves don't exist as long as that possibility and that reality takes place. So the idea of caste, Brad, offers a challenge to this notion of race. That is, race in itself is limited. The idea of race in itself is limited. And that's what we get from the work of Davis. That's what we get from the work of Crenshaw. That's what we get from the work of Hill Collins. And they offer us some tools by which to look at that. And so what I want to do is just talk about some highlights of what I found very informative in the book, and how that and how it sits with the interventions of these scholars around what I think is the work that the book is trying to do. It, in some ways, is trying to speak of caste as something that goes beyond India. And in speaking of caste as something that goes beyond India, it attempts to find and locate those caste members. And he talks about his own disappointment that he went to Trinidad and he couldn't find many of the caste there, although it is more than likely that many Dalits were on that trek and they ended up there, and either they changed their identity or they disappeared like the Black people in Argentina, which is another story of this kind of disappearance, which in fact, the disappearance really never happens. It's kind of like, does a baby born between a Black and a white person, do they disappear? Do they disappear either into the Blackness or either into the whiteness, depending on where they're doing it at? And so these people who belong to this caste, how are they constituent in the caste? That is, what makes them a part of it? Is it their social circumstances? So in India, this social circumstance has a reality. It has a reality which has a long trajectory, a long history, which makes it constituent there. But it is not the only form of isolation and oppression in India. So one could think of gender, one could think of class, one could think of various forms of identity which have stood there to divide what it means to be a human and to create a hierarchy which is part of that definition of what it means to be a human. So what would it mean then to take an idea which is situated here in India and developed as a consequence in India? And it's not just one idea in India, it's a transforming idea in India. It's an idea which has some resonance before there was colonialism, but takes on a different definition as a consequence of the mechanisms of colonialism. I want to talk a little about Patricia Hill Collins' notion of the matrix of domination, but I want to think of that in terms of hers is the matrix. You can think of a matrix like that, but there's another matrix which you can think of as a kind of quantitative mathematical rendering of something like that. Both of these are invoked by this notion of thinking about the caste. One, if you consider that it has been an idea which is time dependent. So in reality, if you think of the caste today, it is not the same as the caste of yesterday. If you think of the caste of tomorrow, it probably won't be the caste of today. But the way caste was looked at and the way it evolved inside of India, according to the story we are given, it evolved both as a relationship among people in India, and it evolved as a historical or part of a historical or religious historical or a colonial historical narrative to justify people at different points in time. And those kinds of definitions change over time. Okay. Are y'all with me? Yeah. So I gave the book a very close reading in this sense, and I have too many notes to read here in my 15 minutes. So I just want to kind of give you a highlight of what I see as very important. In my work, I have been very concerned about how we use different methodologies to understand what it means to be different and what it means to be the same, what it means to be a human. And I think in some ways, the comparative ambition, the lack of the use of universalizing language in order to identify who the caste are, that my work converges with the outline, with the theory produced in the book. In some ways, he's insisting that caste is too important a lens to remain confined to South Asian studies. It is too big of a subject to remain in India. It has had too big of an impact on human beings to just be isolated as something that is just talking about caste and something that is in itself, by its existence, rendering the Dalit people, the Dalit community, into a space of marginalization. So caste becomes a form of this marginalization. To be a Dalit is to be marginalized within the context of India, and that marginalization has taken on various forms over time, and it has not just remained one thing. In much of the conversation about the social construction of race, this is also what people recognize. There is no recognition of the permanence of race. That is, there is no race per se, there is racism per se. There is no individual who just carries blackness in their bones, because blackness does not exist in their bones. It is classified in a certain way and used as a consequence of that classification. So I think that we agree in this because of the development of even what are the Dalit people. I mean, where does this idea come from? And then even, it's a wonderful narrative about once the British get there, they have their own ideas about what they want to do with caste, much less what they want to do with the Dalit people. But the Dalit people become a very important part of their narrative in explaining what caste is. So just being a high caste is not something that's free from the creation and consolidation of the kinds of exploitation that are confronted by the lower caste. And these forms of exploitation are by definition. So if you are by definition of the high caste, it is because of the rendering of those who are in the lower caste. But you know, more than just that, it is the idea that there are European experiences that produce themselves as the universal standard for a conversation. And in this particular narrative, by going through not only the conversations that the Dalits are having with themselves, having with their marginalizing experiences, but also having with their consciousness of struggles that are happening in other parts of the world. A lot of the interaction that the author mentions about the relationship of the Dalit community to the African American community is very telling, because in some ways it's not a two-way street. Now, of course, people like Martin Luther King Jr. always talked about his own relationship to India and, you know, and Gandhi and nonviolence and that kind of thing. But this is a different cross, right? This is a cross where you might say that it is demanding an intersectional analysis, not just the intersectionality of Crenshaw, that is, of these different things of gender, of class, and of these things, but an intersectionality more in the way that Angela Davis talks about it, which is the intersectionality of movements, the intersectionality of struggles. And that makes it more consistent with what Stuart Hall called the co-constituencies of various forms of oppression and domination. That is, it is not so much that you are trying to layer gender with class, with race, with nationalism, with citizenship. It is more so that you understand the ways that these have been in themselves part of matrix of domination, very much in the Patricia Hill Collins sense. That is, they are not necessarily one alone, but that to have the kinds of sexism, the kinds of classism, the kinds of racism we have today, it is important that they be in communication with each other. Now, it's definitely it's important that they be in communications with each other within a nation state, but it is also, especially in these moments, important that they be in communication, in conversation, even if it's just at the theoretical level, across geographic spaces. And in some ways, this calls for that. That it calls for not just the Dalit community to be reading African-American authors, African-American literature, to be fashioning a Black Panther Party, but it is demanding that the Black Panther Party here recognize the struggle of the Black Panther Party in India. It is demanding that the literature, there were certain barriers, so this couldn't happen at an early point because of just the translation of writings and having the access to the language. But there's no excuse now, but to understand more about the struggles of the Dalit community. You understand what I'm saying? That is, they have been already and have a history, and you see it when you read the flavor of this book or even the Caste Matters book. You get a sense of this engagement with African American literature. And I already mentioned a couple of other African American scholars who took the concept of caste as a critique of the ideas of race. Now, I think that, this is a beautiful moment to consider the possibility that there is more of an appreciation of the caste situation. People use the word, especially those who are trying to talk about racism but don't like to use the word racism, or those who are trying to talk about the African American community but trying to run fast from being able to talk about the African American community. I think sometimes they're on the verge of making it illegal in these days, but if they do, I will be guilty of this crime continuously. In good company. So, how am I doing on time? Am I all right? Or what? I need to close it up here? Yes. I need to close it up? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So I think, if I read the book through these lenses that I've tried to articulate for you, then you see that necessarily the task of this project is extremely difficult. He's trying to talk to people who have not taken the time to understand the Dalit community or their plight. And he's expressing already a sympathy with that struggle, with the Black struggle, with the struggle of oppressed people all over the place. So he already is aware of that. And you have an entire community which is aware of that. And they are ready for that struggle. But on the other side is the kind of ignorance. And some of the ignorance is intentional, right? Because people go down the paths which are written, and then there's the whole kind of economy of the academy, which demands that people pay attention to what is already in front of them. And so there is this idea that he is proposing to cross those barriers, to insult those disciplinary grounds. I mean, you heard all this list of degrees he's walking around with, so it wouldn't be too difficult for you to think you need to cross some lines. I can get that. But to do that, it is not an interesting thing to do. A global caste analysis that operates simultaneously across all of these theoretical points that I'm presenting and refuses the installation of any single epistemic center. That is trying to go beyond establishing his own essentialism in a moment where the reality of the essentialisms are already debunked. That is the notion that you are this thing rather than you are in this space. Therefore, your standpoint makes you who you are, is where he's trying to go, I think. So he's understanding caste as a constitutive idea. That's Hall's thing, right? With race, with gender, with capitalism, and so in that way, what he is doing is taking the intersectionality of Crenshaw with the intersectionality of Davis and kind of adding a point which looks at domination, looks at hegemony, looks at power, and looks at kind of where you stand in terms of your social positionality to articulate about these things. That's where you get this whole autobiographical tinge to his work, and that's how I read that. So that these intersections are part of the foundation rather than just a supplementary notion in terms of what he says. So he is actually attempting to do something that many theorize about in a book about people that people don't pay a lot of attention to, and that they haven't received the same kind of attention, but they have experienced a brutal form of oppression. Now, if we just ignore, right, and not try to get in the oppression Olympics and see who wins, definitely the elite community is in the running. Okay, and they're in the running, and they've been in the running for, thousands of years. So the very idea that they're almost not known, and that the struggle and their desire to connect their struggle across spaces is not known, is a challenge. And I appreciate that you've taken this challenge. I think the book is a wonderful read. If you read it, you will get a lot of information. If you read it in companion with Caste Matters, you will come out of it with a good sense of a critique of this moment in which our ideas about domination and about dominated people does not include a true reading of the Dalit experience, and especially for those who can't see the comparison with something like the African American experience, with something like the Black Brazilian experience, with something like the experience of those Black people who were enslaved in the Americas, and their own interaction with members of the Dalit community who came as indentured servants. I would stop there.
I'll pay you later.
Nobody likes speaking after Tukufu Zuberi, but I'm going to do my best, okay? I'm also going to ask the people who are talking to honor me by not talking while I'm speaking. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. So I just want to say, I'm going to start off with the good stuff, and then I'm going to leave you with a little criticism. So you don't have to pay me, and I'm not expecting a hug, okay? Oh, no, it's okay. So this really is, actually, it's a book that made me very sad. And it's not that I wasn't overwhelmed with the triumph of what Suraj is trying to do. It's not that I wasn't overwhelmed by the incredible scholarship, which is really, really amazing. It's one of the main things that I got from this book is the unbearable pain, the unbearable sorrow, and the unbearable silence that has gone on, and the pain of it. As I think what I left, I found myself crying several times as I read this book. So I'm just going to mention the points of pain, and then I'm going to just talk about just one thing. So um, I'm I'm working on I how can I start this? Suraj, you opened my eyes. You really did. I was not unfamiliar with the history of the Dalit. I co-taught a course with Ramya Srinivasan. We looked at partitions, Middle Eastern and the Indian and Pakistani partition, and a lot of Dalit issues came up that at first I have always believed that there was a similarity between. Can you hear me if I move back? Okay. I have always believed there was a similarity between racism and then being Dalit. I had always felt that. But this book challenged some of my assumptions, and so I'm just going to go into what the assumptions are. And part of the pain is that I think you challenged an assumption that I'm building my new book on, which is a really painful moment for me. So, not for you. So, anyway, the first one is I really want to talk about the people who pass. I was incredibly moved by how many Dalits in different situations tried to pass, and the ways that the vocabulary of passing is used in your book. It's so fascinating, and right there you have such an amazing comparison. Not just African Americans, but a tremendous one to African Americans. Passing is in here, and then when you get to Trinidad, and it almost seemed like they all accepted just passing in a way. And so let me tell you the shibboleth that I have been working with that this completely demolishes, which is I have focused my work, and my work does not look at African Americans. I look at racism in the Middle East, and I look at not just anti-Black racism, but I look at other types of racism, there's all kinds, okay? And one of the things that I have really, gone to battle about is that I always feel that racism comes from wherever there was African slavery, the little baby that was left was racism. And I think you're challenging some of this and making me, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with it. I'm probably going to have to, write a chapter and bug you about it here. But I would be very interested in what the audience thought about that and whether you agree with my theory that, wherever there has been African slavery, you have a tendency to find anti-African, anti-Black racism. But then you have to contradict that because that's still an American white versus Black binary, okay? And I want to get back to that binary in a second. But what I have become more interested is looking at where this happens, where no Americans were even involved. All right, so let's look at, for instance, how the Sudanese in Egypt were treated and remain treated. And then you have to look at the entire state and so much of the cultural and political history of Sudan and South Sudan. Are you disagreeing with me, or are you just moving your neck? Oh, okay. Because I mean, if I'm wrong, I thought I was right on that. And I'm really fascinated by the way people that, in an American context would automatically be identified, not necessarily identify themselves, but be identified as Black, doesn't work, and there are people who look, people who I you might identify as Black, who will look at you like, I am not Black. I can prove that I'm not Black. I can go back 8 generations to how long my grandfather came to this land. So I think your book is a tremendous addition in this direction, that it's not just white folks, everybody, and that there are ways, I mean, we're not going to stop blaming them. I'm sorry, you white folks. I mean, I really mean it. I don't mean to make you feel uncomfortable, but the shit is real. But what I am trying to say is that, that's there's more in here, and I think that is really something I wanted to bring up, that this book touches in me. And then I want to get back to so I want to talk a little bit about your engagement with gender. Your next book should be Caste and Women. Okay. And I want everyone to buy this book, but if you're looking for the history of women, this is not the book you're going to find it in. That's okay. It's really important that the history that Suraj is telling is being told. That's okay, but Suraj hints at it quite a bit in the book, and this is really important. And I like this about smart people who like to write books and are as productive as this miracle that we're all acknowledging today. Really, is that that Suraj will come up with another example about caste and how it works out. But you hint at, I mean, you and Tukufu both talked about Angela Davis, but there are important Dalit women here, and you talked a lot about how the issue of caste, race, always centers on the dignity of the women, always centers around who's protecting the women, always centers around who's violating the women, and this is one of the places where I think what a fascinating conversation you could have between Dalit women and African American women. What an incredible, I mean, it will just take what you are trying to do here in this book is a call to movement, and I just think that is one of the ways women bear the scars of these stories too. But I spent a lot of time, Siraj, imagining people. And that's one of the things about the book that's so literally illuminating. And that's a great example of the word illuminating, is it makes you stop and sit, even if you're trying to skim. It makes you stop and sit and think about. Siraj just pointed out that these women were completely dishonored, violated, raped, and you just have to sit there and hold it and imagine. So this book has uncovered and unsilenced, is that a word? Unsilenced so many different things. And I think Tukufu really covered a lot of the other parts that I was going to say about African American history. And finally, I'm writing a book about miscegenation. Okay, I'm writing a book about miscegenation from Senegal to my map is Senegal to Haiti, France, Haiti, Cairo, and Khartoum in the late 18th century through the 19th century. And you just made me think a lot more about what it is to be a miscegenation as well. Thank you, Suraj. Thank you, everybody. Really looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you, everyone. And I think now we're ready to move on to Q&A. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we actually have a mic that's going to be floating around.
Yeah, man.
Suraj, maybe I'll let you.
Choose.
Thank you very much for your work. I want to start with a very honest admission that I only made it 50% through the book, but I do have some questions for you. I've been writing and thinking about color theory, and I was wondering whether or not the two specific examples in the book might actually help you to flesh out a little bit the perception of gender and how that works with erasure inside of the book. One, this concept of sort of Indian attachment to the fiery red of Mars, and what that means in terms of like a kind of balance or contrast. I'm not sure which it is because it's not my country, all right? My country of study. But then also the dark waters of the post, independence or post-colonial, however you want to construct, migration to Trinidad, and what that means to kind of like develop a social construction of race that is still very much attached to the color of Blackness and the color of red.
Maybe we should just answer the questions
As they come, okay. Thank you. I will also take this opportunity to also respond to some of the pointers raised, excellent points raised by Tukufu and Eve. I think, thank you all for sticking around. There's this, so my PhD thesis kind of goes deep into this kind of comparative nodes of genealogy of race and caste. And I look it through the movement's perspective. That's where I think, and I'm so grateful you mentioned Angela Davis, and I think I'm going to work with that intersectionality of movements part. And I think there's more to that. And I think, it's interesting. I never published my PhD thesis actually, even my first, and even this, like hopefully sometime down the line. But there is more. Also, I wanted women to be represented. And I was looking for the actors. Unfortunately, it's very gender driven. And I was like, especially the ethnography that I was kind of collecting. But then, and it's weird to say, not this book, but the next book has an entire section on Dalit women leaders in diaspora, which kind of goes back to 1960s. There's a whole story about that. I just felt that if I do this, it may just be that extra little salt, and it might just give the taste a different flavor. I was very excited to kind of work, but I take this kind of point, and I, in fact, not gender part, no, the narrative, because I just wanted to give like one little narrative and just drop it off. I thought, if there's more exposition. In fact, I facilitated a meeting between Dalit and African American women scholars in Bangalore a few years ago. And that was a place where I was facilitator, but I left because that's not, I wanted. So whatever happens on that front, if it is kind of, reported, Shailaja Paik has written a piece on this, but there's more kind of, and one of the things I think when you work with 3 publishers is the reviewers. It was very interesting how it was getting, So the Oxford reviewers were surprisingly gentle. And I'm not sure if they're in the room, but they were very gentle in the sense of they pushed me towards a direction that I thought I would not take, which is telling more about the story of where this theory, because for me, the Nanded part is part of the global theory. I mean, we think about it, we write about it. So that kind of, but the UK publisher had its, it's kind of interesting how this publishing industry works, because they had a very kind of colonial observations that they wanted me to make. And I think in that, I had a section, whatever I'm saying now will come out in some form in print. So the qualms that are raised here are very well acknowledged and welcomed. And what I'm grateful to right now is to really think about these thinkers very closely. Patricia L. Collins and Kimberly Crenshaw, and there's so many others. Angela Davis had actually come to India, but she was invited by a left-wing kind of group, and she missed out the boat because she looked at the angle and caste question in a very uneducated fashion. And that was kind of a missed call, because she had come to give a lecture, and it felt like Angela Davis would engage with this politics. But unfortunately, she also missed that opportunity. And I think then there remains a responsibility for most of us. However, the theoretical kind of contributions kind of, come about. And I think that's the more affiliation. I think the color theory is still kind of evolving within the caste context as well. And that's why I make this chapter called Dalit Republic of Trinidad. So many of these Caribbean republics that we see who have a kind of Indian population, they have the lower caste kind of groups who are majority in that. He's there.
Thank you for the talk. So as you know, India's 1991 reforms moved the company sharply towards free market capitalism. And now there's substantial evidence that those reforms have been very beneficial for Dalits. Dalit poverty has fallen at a faster rate than India as a whole. Home and vehicle ownership for Dalits have risen. Food and housing quality have improved. And practices like tea stall segregation have declined. With capitalism, many Dalits have been able to transition away from traditional occupations like agricultural labor, raising their standards of living and social position. So prominent Dalits like Chandra Prasad and the DICCI have argued that capitalism had led to meritocracy, which has improved the position of millions of Dalits. What do you think about this theory?
I mean, actually, in my first book, I have an entire chapter on them, on Dalit capitalism, and they didn't like it. And Chandrabhan Prasad is actually a good friend to me, and he still didn't like it. Other friends like it. Because the critique of capitalism for me as much was not against the principle of capitalism. It was more about how much, I mean, in India, capitalism or in any caste society, and that's what that's this kind of, my doctoral thesis at Oxford was exploring about the inevitability of caste-like standards that exist in any societies that are ranked, where the ascription of your category of identity may be something, but what you decide with that is to do with market forces. That's how, the state is eventually a market force. That's how modern states are being formed. But I am not a negator of the idea of Dalit capitalism. I don't want to dismiss it. But I wanted them to tell me concretely what was their project about. So it's like they thought the way the black entrepreneur politics did, there's the whole kind of black industry and stuff like that. They thought they would do it. But unfortunately, they were concerned with a tiny percentage of government's outsourcing of content. That's not capitalism. That just is meant to make me part of the market share, but which is like 2% or something like that, or even less, which basically means, and the capitalism that they were talking about was not about heavy industries. They were talking about small scale industries. And it's such a stereotypical way that small scale industries is meant for this kind of small scale people, but the majority macro capital, like the industries that really govern and that kind of regulate the inflow of capital through import and export, no Dalits to be seen. And that's where I see, how do we really understand capitalism? Then we see the neoliberal forces, the way we understand is to make sense of identity as a saleable commodity. So you can be a Dalit and you can negotiate and sell your identity by capitalism or by environmentalism or whatever you call it, right? So if they would have said Dalit neoliberalism, that would have made more sense, because then that's what the new policies is like. However, your point is well taken. The rates have been declining since 1991, and there's been reforms. But also on the other side, the disparity continues, right? In the sense of it's like a sword that you swing in any direction is meant to hurt. And what's the response? Now there are many people who say, let's abolish capitalism or whatever. I'm like, you do it, and I bet you're not going to succeed, because this idea is great. I'm not, the idea of abolishing capitalism and stuff like this is great, but pragmatically speaking, there are groups who need that advantage of capital. But does that mean capitalism? I'm not sure. People really conflate, and I think we need a lecture. Maybe I need to give a lecture on Dalit capitalism to really explain how capital C and lower C capitalism really functions, so that more Wharton students can get better jobs. Yes.
Hi, I'm Carolina, and thank you so much all for being here. I had a question about what Dr. Zuberi was talking about specifically with intersectionality and finding common ground from intersectional, like the acknowledgement of the intersectionality as part of a struggle against matrices of dominance, and how specifically important it is to find common ground internationally and within different societies. But I guess my question is, so as you talk about the intersectionality of struggle against marginalization and matrices of oppression, as far as when groups from different societies come together and form potential solutions or policy proposals or just a philosophical approach to potentially overcoming those barriers, then how, and you could answer this or whoever, could these be successfully sort of disseminated from a central collective effort into the sort of specifications of each society, and so that they work they work within different context of different nations with specific institutions, or specific factors that are stronger in some nations that lead to these discriminations, such as if religion is a stronger factor, or if skin color is a stronger factor. Like, how do you see that then coming out of a collective action? Thank you.
That's my student, just saying.
Okay. So here was my way of trying to offer a subtle critique, is I gave basically the names of 4 theorists that I thought he could pay more attention to. And they are all theorists of gender and Black feminist thought and how we can increase our understanding of race and of class by more of an accentuation of gender. So I was agreeing with what Professor, yeah, what she was saying, Professor Troutt Powell was saying. That is, what I was trying to suggest is that if you want to really develop a theory, which is a global theory about caste, and you are very concerned about how that theory interacts with race and class, that there are already some theoretical arguments that have been presented about how to do that. Now, one notion is intersectionality. So one way to think about intersectionality is to think about how it positions in an individual's understanding of their own identity. But another way to think about intersectionality is to think about groups and organizations or movements which are trying to change the world, and how those movements, those organizations, benefit by recognizing their co-constituent issues and how they are fighting against different dimensions of something which is multidimensional. But by coming together and intersecting with these movements, that there is a benefit in their actions. There's a benefit in the individual, in their identity. There's a benefit in these movements attempting to make social change in what they do. A classic example is the fight against apartheid in South Africa, which many people around the world saw that as a movement which intersected with their own movements of social change. Now, the Dalit community already saw this. They had an intuitive, I don't know if they read this book by Angela Davis, I don't think so, because they did it before she wrote the book. and before she expressed the idea, but they had already this notion of an intersectionality with a movement. So they already felt an intersectionality with the Black movement in the United States. And so what I was suggesting is at a theoretical level, because in some ways this book is about theory. And this book is a critique of how theory is being written, especially race theory and class theory. And it is suggesting that race and class theory need to find a way together. And so what I was suggesting is that rather than essentialize any movement into itself, that once a movement is identified, once a group of people are oppressed and they are collectively fighting against that oppression and they identify it, that they find strength in relating their movement to other movements. And this is why I was saying with class, with nation, with citizenship. I mean, you can imagine the issue of citizenship, for example, in the United States today. It finds a natural allegiance, if you will, with those individuals who are attempting to leave crushed societies in one way or another, and they're attempting to move to Europe, and they're being stopped at the borders of Europe. And the US has created a wave of activity to punish individuals who are here and their citizenship is ambiguous and it is being used as a vehicle for their domination. I hope that helps answer your question.
So I think we have time for one more question.
Congratulations, Suraj, and thank you, professors, for like a wonderful commentary on that. It's great to learn. I haven't read the book yet, and I'm going to buy the copy and by today. The one observation, like maybe it's a reflection I would like to hear from Suraj and others when you read and reviewed. I was thinking about the intergenerational knowledge transfer from the previous generation to this generations, and how that has been shifted, particularly when she's talking about, why it's a sad, sorrow, pain, and is there like any conversion has been happened towards the Dalit joy, and what is the like in a global story of caste, where is the Dalit joy lies in, and where that joy is, and which part of the world it's emerging, whether it's origin from the India itself, or it goes from somewhere else, or it's intersecting from the new generation to the old generation, or the knowledge is converting from the old to a new. So, and if at all, if you want a story of a caste, whether it has to stay in the pain and sorrows and sadness, or it also come from the other side of it. And what would be the new generation to view it? And I'm thinking about specifically talking about have you in another side, when you like trying to break this, why the caste has to be attached only with Dalits, and what is like the caste stories of the others, and then when they intersect with either with other races, and if it is intersects with other races, how that emerging out of it, and then what that intersectionality building as a movement, if it is building as a movement, and what that movement will look like, and then how that movement will emerge as a new intersectional theory. So just to reflect. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank Thank you for that question. It's interesting it's so interesting the way you talked about these stories and everything. One of the things that's very, and I think a population that can help answer this question is the Palestinian diaspora. And I was just with a Palestinian family, friends of mine, who live in Doha. And their little girl, who's 5 years old, has never been to Palestine, and she can name every single village in Palestine. And this is very common. This is very common, and the way the stories of the actual villages are told, also by Maronite Christians from Lebanon in the diaspora, in order to keep this memory of home always. And so it's passed down through story after story after story. And certainly in the case of Palestinians, has created a huge movement. This is what keeps the movement going. This is exactly this kind of memories passed down from a reality of the past that might not even be as real, but the pain is real, passed down through story, through story, through story, thus being able to create, fighters for memory, if you will, Hamas, or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I say something about joy? So I went to the Biennale in Sao Paulo, and so I was talking to Suraj about I'm going to the Biennale. I'm hanging out with all these people, and he introduced me to a collective of Dalit artists who had. There was a section of Black Brazilian artists who had a booth, and they are a collective of artists. And behind them was this collection of art, Dalit art. And am I saying that right? Maybe you keep saying the wrong thing. Okay, good. All right. And the paintings were beautiful. Now, and they gave me some joy, although some of them were about very sad things, which is not unusual in art, right? Some of the most beautiful things can be expressed through some of the most sad notions. It's like a really good love song. It will sound beautiful, but if you take the words literally, my God, the romance is gone. So just thinking about how joy itself is not just found in the celebration of sometimes it's found in the presentation of that reality. And these artists were creating beauty. At the same time, they were keeping the narrative of what the lives of the elite people have been. I just like to think that joy is not always just bubbly in your mouth. Sometimes it's very much giving you access to the reality.
Also, just as a footnote, there are, I think, a group of young Dalit scholars today who actually really understand that gap around joy. And so, for example, there's a wonderful young woman scholar who's working on a PhD at Columbia right now on Dalit humor, for example, and specifically from Dalit women's perspectives. So really, bringing that idea of joy center stage, but really contextualizing it in terms of gender and that gender question around, Dalit women's, the even greater invisibility of Dalit women's joy in particular, right? And sort of trying to foreground that as an analytic. So, yeah.
No, thank you for raising very briefly. Actually, I wrote about this very Dalit humor part in Caste Matters. There's a whole section, and also talk about love of Dalits. And I talked through my grandmother, this kind of intergenerational aspect of what that love means and how that kind of develops. But then this is such an interesting invitation to think about solidarities formed based on joy and what really joy does to a movement. What I love this is about Tukufu's point was about, this intersectionality of groups, movements, and people. It's not like, it's not pedigree. It's not temporal. And I'm going to run with that idea somewhere. And you really planted something crazy, and I think it has to be done. So I really appreciate that.
All right, thank you. All right, well, we are officially out of time. So I'd like to thank all of you who've stayed on, and I would like to again thank our wonderful colleagues. And of course, a huge thank you to Suraj for sharing the book with us. Thank you all very much.